everything we are as leaders is controllable by how we think and feel. So, if you choose not to smile until 11 o'clock in the morning, then you've made a conscious decision to go that route. If you choose on the first thing, try this, and to your listeners, try this. Next time you're feeling a bit grumpy or whatever else, on any day of the week, but Mondays for me in particular, rather than getting up and allowing that to absorb your day, do something immediately to correct it.
Welcome to the CEO Sessions, hosted by Ben Fanning. And here's Ben.
We got a great interview for you today with Charles Brewer, Chief Operating Officer of Canada Post. He was appointed in February 2020, and Charles leads all operational aspects of Canada Post business, including plants, delivery, engineering, and network, and real estate. His organization is quite large, leading 64,000 employees. They delivered over 16 million addresses, and they delivered nearly 8.4 billion items. And a little factoid that I didn't know about before was that Canada Post delivers to a larger area than the Postal Service of any other nation, including Russia. Charles is a global executive with more than 35 years of experience in the areas of post, parcel, international shipping, and e-commerce, primarily in the past with DHL, which is where I originally got to know him, and we talk a little bit about that. And he has held senior leadership roles in Europe, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, and the U.S. And he holds an advanced logistics diploma from Cranfield University School of Management and completed the advanced senior executive management program at Henley Business School, which are both located in the UK. Now, here's a little bit about what you can expect today in the podcast interview. Well, the first few seconds you have with anyone are the most critical, and he takes this very seriously, and I think you'll find that fascinating, as well as how Charles became the Chief Energy Officer of his organization, and also how to use Amazon Alexa to help motivate your team on Monday mornings. This was really funny and a great strategy that Charles shares with us. Then we'll get into the big career benefits of working horizontally first before moving vertically. If you're thinking about promotion and moving up in your organization, you're going to really like that strategy. And then we get into social media. Charles is rather skilled and rather engaged in social media. And we're going to talk about how to use LinkedIn to brand yourself, make you stand out, and accelerate your career. Then the 3 big reasons every leader should become active on LinkedIn. And Charles shares a story of his big LinkedIn aha moment when he was visiting Alaska. Then we'll get into the sad indictment of leadership when employees don't speak up inside the organization. And leaders have a responsibility for that. And then what key leadership communication that Charles himself sends out to the entire organization every single Friday. And then we get into some really interesting tips and strategies around conquering burnout in yourself and your team and how you can prevent that. Charles shares his 2 failures that had an early impact on him early on, but then led to success later in his career, and then how to use mindfulness as a C-suite leader. Again, I think you're going to get a lot out of this specific interview. Enjoy. Hi, Charles. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I know it's been a while. And
a
for
long
audience
time.
Purposes, I like to give a little context to this. So I used to work for DHL in Manhattan, which, as you'll hear a little bit more about Charles here in a second, he was executive vice president at that time. And I didn't know that. And he was walking through our Manhattan office. I hadn't seen him before. And all I heard was this guy with this interesting accent walking down the halls. And it was like a ball of energy coming down. He was high-fiving people, talking to people. And I was like, man, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And he came up and introduced himself to me. I was like, man, this guy has got a lot of energy and passion for his job. And I was feeling a little bit run down as I remember that day. And you gave me a huge pop of energy. And the funny thing was, I met you, I talked to you, and then you went and you were talking to other people. And I still wasn't sure. I'm like, who is this guy? And they're like, he's like your boss's boss's boss. I was like, oh my God, I hope
I know
Hope I made a
it's a
decent
scary thought that's where I got to. But to the point, Ben. I mean, that was a long time ago. And I think it was like winter. I remember it was an evening. It was winter. It was dark outside the Union Square sales office,
Mm-hmm.
which wasn't the most pleasant, if I remember right. It was pretty cramped in that building.
Very cramped, yeah.
But to the point, Ben, I think it's a nice way to introduce this sort of discussion, really, which is I always tell people, and again from my own experiences, that that was the only time we met, and those seconds you have the opportunity to make eyes sparkle or to make them go out. You have a choice. So yeah, I take the choice of trying to make people's eyes sparkle. So I'm glad that you remember, and it's a long, many things have happened since, and some painful, some great, but it's good to chat again.
I mean, that was at least 14 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I know. We were both different then, and probably looked a bit different as well.
In my research, I heard that some people call you the chief energy officer.
The answer is yes, and I use it quite often for myself. But I use it, and again, I'm with Canada Post now. I talk about it a lot with the leadership team, down to supervisory level. Every single week, I sign off with the chief energy officer because, again, logistics has become a very digital environment, and automation is now at the forefront of everything, especially since COVID-19. But we're still a people business. This is a people industry, and as you just described and articulated, our leaders and myself, it starts with me, but the leadership team, I think, have that opportunity to create shining eyes, and they do that by being the chief energy officer. So
wow.
I do claim it a little bit, but I have to say, and just so in case I get a lawsuit, it's stolen from someone else who is a great, a really great speaker. That if any of your listeners ever want to Google and read a little bit more about the chief energy officer, I highly recommend him. He's fantastic. He runs the Energy Project, a company called the Energy Project. And he has some fascinating soundbite leadership tips around how to be the chief energy officer. So I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Well, there's no reason there can't be more than one. And in fact, the world would probably be a lot better if there were more than one.
Absolutely.
So, I love the idea of energy coming from the top and setting the tone versus coming from somewhere else in the organization. I suspect the most effective place is for it to come at the top and almost have that as part of your job description.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, we've all been there, seen it and done it. But in fact, I was talking about it earlier this week. I'm not very good on a Monday morning. I'm sure many of your listeners aren't either. So Monday mornings for me are a bit of a struggle. And if you get on a call at 7:30, especially again at the moment where we're doing so many things virtually and via video conference and so on and so forth, but you get on a call on a Monday morning and the tone of that call is rather depressing, it just sets you up for such a bad week, So
oh my gosh.
I just got myself an Alexa Echo, not to promote anything, by the way, although I'm happy to do so. And you can say to Alexa, please tell me a joke. So I did that on the Monday morning call. So please tell my audience a joke because they needed cheering up. But anyway, all good stuff.
Well, I want to build on that because there is some research, and I've quoted this research, and it is by a UK publication who did a survey that said that the average time when someone cracks their first smile on Monday morning doesn't happen till 11:16 a.m.
Yeah.
How about that?
I can believe it. Ben. Yeah. I can believe it. But the nice thing about it is, Ben, is that everything we are as leaders is controllable by how we think and feel. So if you choose not to smile until 11 o'clock in the morning, then you've made a conscious decision to go that route. If you choose on the first thing, try this, and to your listeners, try this. Next time you're feeling a bit grumpy or whatever else on any day of the week, but Mondays for me in particular, rather than getting up and allowing that to absorb your day, do something immediately to correct it. Go for a walk, go for a run, go and walk, talk to your daughter, talk to your son, talk to your wife, talk to your dog. Whatever cheers you up, whatever makes you happier, do some online shopping, whatever it is that sort of can pick you up, do it. And you'll find that your mental state really transitions really quickly into a more positive state. And that transitions then to how you interact with other people. And water flows downhill, So again, like I said, and it's a good place to start, how we act and
Wow.
feel and behave, sets the tone for the organization, whether it be on a Monday morning or a January or a 12-month period or a 10-year period. How we think, feel, and behave, you're setting the drumbeat for the organization. So
Oh, I love that. It sounds a lot like the word that comes into my mind is momentum. You're creating momentum by generating that. Like you said, it's for yourself and for the rest of your week. But I love that. I love the idea of it being contagious in a positive way. Not in a pandemic kind of way, but in a positive way.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think in leadership in general, I mean, there is a lot more to it, but there is so much that actually is fairly basic that that we can influence on a second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, etc., and that we can influence. There's much that's going on around us outside that is a little bit tougher, but
yeah, and we're talking about too for you right now. So you are in the C-suite, COO at Canada Post, which a lot of people, especially outside of Canada, I don't think they really understand the magnitude of what we're talking about there. And you, as the Chief Energy Officer, just let the listeners know about the size and scope of the operation that we're talking about.
I mean, I think it's similar for many postal operators. So big organizations. So we have sort of 60,000 odd people. So 60,000 people to create shining eyes for every single day, doing sort of more than 1.5, 2 million parcels a day. So, and the largest geography. Actually, but I'm going to stop there because there's got a bit of background noise. Sorry, 1 second. I'm on a call. You have to go away.
Yeah, no problem. I like it.
Sorry.
That's good.
So let's go with that question again. We can go it again. So I think you were talking about this. So I'll go scale and start from there.
Yeah. Like I think I read some crazy statistic that it has the largest, was it intra-country delivery area in the world?
Yeah, it's the biggest. I got to be honest, and I am very honest for those who don't know me. I knew Canada was big. I didn't know it was the biggest geographic territory in the world. It's huge. So from one side to the other is an enormous country, with lots and lots of big, broad spaces in between with trees and forests and lakes and so on and so forth. But a beautiful country, by the way. Really, if you haven't been to Canada, I highly recommend it. But from a business perspective, that size brings in its own unique challenges. So we have 60,000 odd people doing an amazing job day in, day out, who up until about March, April were going through the year in the sort of normal fashion. And then COVID-19 hit us, and everyone started ordering online because obviously retailers were shut, etc. Or the bricks and mortar were shut. So our volumes just went through the roof. And a statistic I like to use quite often is that about 4 weeks ago on a particular Monday, we did the volume on that Monday 4 weeks ago that we predicted we would do in 2029. So 9 years ahead of plan, and 9 years ahead of plan with fundamentally the same infrastructure that we had last year. So you're trying to push significantly more volume and some rather odd-shaped volume, kayaks and barbecues and all sorts of things that people ordered, who suddenly realized they needed during COVID. So we had a huge increase in volumes, some rather funny-shaped volumes, which are particularly difficult for the logistics sector and the postal sector. And of course, doing all of that whilst keeping the 60,000 people healthy and safe. That was priority number one, which means you have that distancing in plants in the hubs. You have the distancing in delivery. We had to run double shifts and split the shifts, so we had less people in the building. So productivity wise, significantly more challenging than a normal day. So more volume, more strange shaped volume, and less productivity equals some very challenging and difficult times. But I have to say, on the whole, the Canadians, I think, really super appreciated what Canada Post have done, not just through COVID, but even today, and continue to do. So for the most part, we got some lovely letters and cards and street art and window art and all sorts of things saying thank you to our delivery agents, which was really heartwarming. I have to say a huge thank you to anyone and everyone who did that, or who said thank you to any of my delivery agents. Is fantastic. And the delivery team themselves were just outstanding. I mean, just outstanding. Working 7 days a week. Very few had any break through the whole of COVID-19.
Yeah. So many people think, hey, your volumes are up. So it means, right, that it must be a big party, right, for the company, right? They're popping champagne. You're like, no. It comes with a whole different set of challenges that you haven't had to face in this way before.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very, very challenging. But again, like I said, every day we still get thrown a few curveballs. Not as many as we were back in April and May, but every day we still learn a new trick or two. But as I said, I think the overarching memory I'll take from COVID-19, whenever we get through it, is the team were just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah,
just
awesome.
fantastic. Yeah.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because you have a really interesting background, and I'd like to dive a little bit into it. Could you talk a little bit about where you grew up, and if you ever thought you'd actually, or when did you actually believe, hey, I think I could be in that C-suite and do a good job?
I'm not so sure I still do believe it, but so I'm English by birth, as you mentioned, Ben, at the start, with my rather strange accent. So apologies to anyone who needs a translation on this one as we go through it. But English by birth.
I'm from Alabama, so I'll try to make sense of it the best I can.
So grew up obviously in England. But I got into logistics by accident, more than anything else. And to your question, I never for one second dreamt that I would end up on the C-suite. But I came into logistics by accident, which in itself is quite an amusing story. But I came in via DHL. So I joined DHL 36 years ago. And in the UK, in London. I didn't know who DHL was. I didn't know anything about logistics, and I started at the lowest level. I think I started as a customer service agent, and then I was a courier. But to your question, what I did start to appreciate, two things that I appreciated and aspired to fairly early on. One was, through the first few years, and obviously having had interactions with leaders, I worked out that the most effective leaders were leaders that had a broad understanding of how logistics operated. So if you just went sort of vertical from a career perspective, it was okay. And there's lots of good reasons for doing that. But if you wanted to be a very effective leader, if you had experiences in other disciplines, other functions, and so minimally you could have a conversation with your employee about sales if you're in operations, or operations if you're in sales, that would make me a more effective leader. So I worked out fairly early on that building the jigsaw puzzle would be a good thing to do. So I deliberately set about saying, okay, I went from customer service to operations, to being a courier, from courier to moving into sales, from sales I went back into my first leadership position. So I started to move around the different sort of pieces, jigsaw puzzles of the company, with a view that I anticipated that if I ever got to a leadership position, which I did aspire to do.
So Is it right to say that you recognize the benefit of jumping functions or be working cross-functionally? Or it sounds like you weren't just say, hey, I'm just going to be the best courier I can be. I'm going to really understand courier, but I'm also going to, so you were identifying other roles that gave you more that horizontal experience.
Absolutely. And to this day, when I get asked a lot, about how do they progress their career, I talk to them that it's really important, especially when you're younger. You have an aspiration to just go vertical, from whatever level to the next level to the next level. That's how you see your career. But I think there's
accelerate by going straight up versus
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but I still believe to this day that there are times, various sort of milestones in your career where you need to go horizontally to gain that other jigsaw piece experience. Depending on what you want to be longer term. So I worked that out at a fairly, and I was very lucky that I had some very good, we didn't necessarily call each other mentors or mentees then, but I did have some very good friends who were in senior positions that I could talk to about this. And that was number one. The second one that it was a piece of advice that was given to me again when I was fairly young and still starting out. And the then director said to me when I was talking to him about my career that there was two things he told me which were fantastic pieces of advice. One was try to think out sort of two jobs. So, if let's say you're a supervisor in operations and you have an aspiration to be a director, a regional director, what would be useful for you to know versus the other candidate or candidates you're going up against? So in other words, if I'm recruiting for that regional director and I've got somebody who's just gone vertically versus somebody who's gone vertical, horizontal, other functions, a couple of projects in a different space, if you're on a par from a skill set perspective, that experience would just put you 1 or 2 or 3 rungs higher than someone else. So I think that was fantastic advice, to try and think sort of 1 or 2 jobs out.
So in other words, the job you have, or the job that you currently have, or if you were to get there, or the job you're applying for.
Yeah. So if you, let's say, for example, I wish to be the president of Canada Post, and I'm currently the director, or the VP. So between me and the president is, my job, the CEO on the board, on the management team. But it may be appropriate, rather than thinking going vertical, to go and do sales next, which would give me another arrow in my quill that would make me a stronger candidate than the same person who's gone vertical. So I kind of worked out that to be successful in your career aspirations, 2 things. One is to have that jigsaw puzzle and try and fill out the map, but also that you were trying to put yourself 2 or 3 rungs ahead of whomever you were going up against. And it could be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people.
Yes.
So that was one piece of advice he gave me, which was really, really good advice. And it was
one thing about that really resonates with me too. A lot of times employees get completely frustrated because they want to move up, but they want to move up the career ladder, but someone's standing on that next rung.
Absolutely.
And maybe they're not going anywhere. So the employee thinks, well, I'm just get frustrated. They disengage, or maybe they just start looking for another job and they quit. But it's different, the career ladder versus like a career rock wall, where you move side to side. And I think it's interesting for the audience to hear this. You're like, hey, this was your strategy early on. To look horizontally for opportunities, not just wait around in the same role, waiting for one person and then getting frustrated and leaving. Right? You're creating your opportunity that way.
Yeah, yes, Ben, and it kind of evolved. And it started with a bit of an emotional view that seems to make sense, and then I actually took it through to at least once every sort of 6 months, taking a bit of time out and thinking about, what do I need to learn or have experience in or have exposure to that would help fulfill that sort of map of generalism and that ability to sort of stand out vis-a-vis somebody else. So that was the one great piece of advice I was given, which has served me well. And the second one that really helped tremendously, actually. And I think we're going to talk about social media later, but LinkedIn and other. Yeah,
go there. Media, talk about it. Yeah.
They weren't around in those days, obviously. Employee branding, sort of branding yourself.
Okay.
Wasn't something that was really spoken about, but the advice I was given, which again, has morphed into sort of having a digital presence now. But he said you need to stand out. He said you need to make sure that people know you exist, and I thought that was a really interesting comment. And he took that one stage further, which I've used ever since, and I still share it today. Which is, he said, you should identify the 6 people that can have the greatest influence on you achieving that career goal. So once you've mapped out the job 2 out that you want to do, so let's say it's that regional director role. Once you've mapped that out and said, okay, that's what I aspire to be, and you sort of thought about how you get there and what sort of experience you may need to get. The other piece of advice he gave me was that he said then, well, who would be the 6 people that would have the greatest influence on you getting that director position? And it's not just, most people tend to think it's, so this happens every single day. It happens today, happened last week. Somebody will rock up for an interview with me, and the first time we've met is that interview. I mean, talk about setting yourself up for failure. Had he or she spent the last year trying to find some way to connect into me, whatever it was, could be, hey, Charles, I'm working on this project. I love your advice. Hey, Charles, I've got some problems in the workplace. Can you help out? Hey, Charles, what were your career aspirations? Hey, it could be anything. Could be the contact has to be relevant. I hasten to add. Don't just ring up and say, I'm thinking about my lunch. What would you suggest? So it has to be relevant. But people love to talk about themselves, as we're doing here, and love to share their experience. So it's a really easy way to tap into the 6 people that are going to have that greatest influence on you being successful in that career aspiration. You'll learn a lot through it because they impart some great knowledge. And next time, so going back to the point earlier, we have 60,000 people in Canada Post. The next time we're sitting having a succession planning session, which we did yesterday, rather than the person saying, I've had limited exposure to employee ABC, they say, you know what, I know this girl, she's fantastic. She rang me the other day, we were talking about a project she was working on, and they just stand out. And to bring that sort of just to give you a sort of a literary sort of example in my family environment. So I have a daughter and a son, a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. And my daughter's incredibly studious, and my son is a little bit more like me. He's a bit cheeky, big smile, all the rest of it. But anyway, my wife gets very concerned about my son because of that. And I always tell her, you don't need to worry, because whenever I go to the school, everybody knows who Henry is. He's standing out. And I think it's each person listening to this call has to find their own way of doing that. And I'm not suggesting for 1 second you should just copy me or copy someone else, but find ways to stand out. Think about those 6 key influencers and start making contact.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's amazing advice for people. One of the key words I think about when I hear you talk about it is that many people think about their career as something that's happening to them.
Yeah.
Like they get a call from a recruiter. And what your strategies for your career and the advice you're giving out here are extremely proactive.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Thoughtful about roles you want to take on.
Yeah.
And then once you identify that, which I think most employees haven't gone through even that exercise. And then once you have that identified, really identify those people that you want to interact with. And
absolutely.
I mean, that is incredible. Now, I know, and one of the reasons I've been able to stay in touch with you is through LinkedIn, because we met so many years ago, and we don't message all the time, but I keep up with what you're up to. And that's how this interview ultimately transpired. And I'm wondering from your standpoint, how do what advice do you have, or how's it impacted you being on LinkedIn?
Sure.
And being a C-suite leader also on LinkedIn, where a lot of C-suite leaders, I think, are maybe on there but not active. You're very active and engaged on there.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's like everything. It's sort of evolving. So I've been on social media and using social media for some time now, for lots of different reasons. I first went there really because I love to learn, and I learned so much from reading articles, commentary, just factoids, small pieces that you can really keeps you up to speed with what's going on in various facets, or whichever facets you're particularly interested in. So that's why I went there in the first place. But I think to the question, and again, so going back to the sort of standing out and your sort of employee brand, I think there are sort of 3 huge benefits and reasons to do it. One is for your organization. So your organization is a great platform to sort of promote the organization, promote what you're doing, and not you personally, but what the company is doing, and that helps your customers feel very connected to you. So if you take LinkedIn, and each social media is different, you're reaching a different audience and different messaging. So LinkedIn clearly is sort of the sort of business environment, and so many, whether it was DHL e-commerce or Canada Post, our customers are there, and there's a great medium there which costs virtually nothing for you to be able to push around content that your customers would want to know, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent. So I think it's there's a great link and a great reason to do it from a customer perspective. I think there's a really great reason to do it from an employee perspective. You'll be amazed. I mean, again, you probably get the same thing, Ben, but the number of employees who comment, particularly more junior, middle level employees, who comment on that they're really proud that I or Canada Post are out there talking about what's going on within Canada Post, and that I had a comment to them saying congratulations on your 30 years, it's fantastic, John, or whatever else it may be. There is, I think, that employee branding, that employee engagement. It's a good venue to tap into a large part of you. I mean, I can only see so many of my 60,000 people a year, and at the moment it's even more difficult. So places like LinkedIn give us a way to connect. And again, I'm always amazed by the number of people that say, oh, Charles, I follow you, and we were talking the other day, so it crops up everywhere, so from the.
Is there a memorable situation where someone brought up LinkedIn? You're like,
Loads. I'll give you a great one. This is back in my DHL days. I was one of the first execs to visit Alaska. So I went up to Alaska to go and say hello to the team up there, and so we had 2 salespeople in Alaska, and so I went to go and say hello to them and high
that's
five
a big
them.
state to cover.
It is, yeah,
But
to
not a
high
problem.
five them and so on and so forth. And I walked into this office, and there was a sales. This is going back about 8 or 9 years ago now, and there was this girl sitting at her desk, and she was a field sales executive. And she went, "Oh, you're Charles." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, great to see you." And we chatted. And I looked over her shoulder, and she had a printout on the wall, which I could tell my text. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, I wrote on LinkedIn something, and you congratulated me for winning ABCD Sales Award." And she printed it out. So, again, like I said earlier.
Goodness.
So, like we said earlier, sometimes we underestimate the smallest things can make the most and the biggest difference. And so, yeah, you got to use all mediums to connect with your employees. So that would be the second one. Is clearly from an employee perspective, and thirdly, it's about self branding and standing out. And going back to your point, in the earlier days, it was doing what I just described. Today, I do a lot through social media, and so I get invited to speak at a lot of events and participate at activities because of that. So people wouldn't know I existed otherwise. So there's a lot of COOs and C-suite people out there. So I use it for a bit of employee branding too.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's stick with that train of thought with the employees. So say an employee has a big idea and maybe they want to communicate that. They don't feel like it's getting any traction. What advice do you have for them when they try to communicate that, and maybe even as high as the C-suite?
Yeah, well, I think for the C-suite listeners, you've got to try and create, and it's not easy. Again, it's always everything's a bit of a challenge, but you've got to try and create a culture where employees feel comfortable in raising their opinions. It's something like 48% on sort of, if you look at the Mercer studies and the Gallup 12 results, something like 48% of employees are afraid to say what they really think globally. I think that's such a sad indictment on leadership, that we've created cultures where employees don't feel comfortable to say, "Hey, Charles, I don't agree that the van should be pink, it should be red," or whatever they feel, or that they have an idea. So I think first and foremost, and it's not easy, but first and foremost, you've got to try and create the mechanisms and the culture where people can connect into the C-suite or into your role. And how do you do that? So that's probably the next question. How do you go about it? But personally, try and de-layer as much as you possibly can. I know organizations love to create directors, senior directors, senior directors, senior directors of the senior director. So we end up with sort of 12 positions between you and the front line. But it's the worst thing you can do as an organization. The very best thing you can do is to try and de-layer as much as you can, so that you keep yourself as close to where the action is. I mean, very honestly, the delivery agent in my world today, or the courier in DHL, that's where the action happens. And if you don't get that right, you're kind of missing the point. Or the server in the restaurant, or the chef,
the front lines.
The front line. That's where you've really got to be. So I think de-layer as much as you can, promote and give lighthouse examples and celebrate every interaction that stimulate comes from the front line. So I'll give you a good example. So I have done for probably about 10 or 11 years now, every Friday, without fail, on any given Friday, holidays. I'll tell you a funny story in a second, but every Friday, without fail, I send out a weekly email. It's the shortest thing. It's a 3-4 whatever's relevant. It's written by me, not by a ghostwriter. I've been asked that many times. Is it somebody do this for you? You can't possibly do it yourself. And that goes out to all employees, or minimally down to whatever level has an email. We cover a bit of business in there, but we also cover a bit of fun, cover a bit of news, whatever else. Anyway, so in Canada Post, it's one of the things that when I came here, I kept it going. I do it in Canada Post, I did it in DHL. And so every Friday it goes out. And to give you an example of, and it takes time, to create that culture. So, but the feedback you get is the first time ever that somebody from the 12th floor head office is talking to us in our language and really connecting with us and so on and so forth. In such an informal way, and you start to sort of, as I said, that ball starts to move in terms of creating that culture. And so, I invite people to write to me and tell me what's going on, to share stories, share pictures, any problems, come to me directly. And so, one of the challenges for our delivery agents, and again, it's in history, it's sort of been a bit of a sarcastic humor thrown at this, but dog bites are real. And we do get, you'd be surprised at how many dog bites we get every week. So we do a lot to try and counter that. But anyway, to the point, one particular employee wrote to me about 2 weeks ago and said, hey, look, he's been talking about this for about a year or so, that he wants to have, so they carry, our delivery agents carry like a pepper spray to sort of ward off anything, but including dogs if they have to. But apparently it doesn't sit very well on the uniform, and they can't access it easily, which means by the time they get to it, the dog's already mauled them or whatever they're going to do to them, etc.
Oh,
so he was saying, look, I designed this kit, how it could look on our uniform. And I looked at it and I said, seems to make sense to me. And I said, so why has it not been implemented? Oh, well, my supervisor didn't think it was a good idea, or my manager didn't think it was a very good idea, and I've been pushing it. But I guess like everybody else, Charles, you'll ignore it. So I said, no, I'm not going to ignore it. So I sent it to their health and safety team and said, hey, have a look at this. And now they're working on how they can incorporate it in the uniform. So,
wow.
But it's a good example of two things. It's a good example of how to create.
Break it down for me.
Yeah, how to create that culture that you want to get to. But it's also a good example of why you should try and limit layers. Because if they didn't have the 2 layers above, we would have probably got that implemented 2 years ago, not 2 weeks ago. So, and not every idea results in a yes, but you just got to create that environment where people feel comfortable, more comfortable to say what they really think.
Do you think that person's manager, like, oh, that guy went to the COO to get his idea, he skipped over all of this? Is it? How do you approach all the layers between you and that idea in terms of
celebrate it? Celebrate
it. It's like, hey, you guys missed out on this, but
yeah, I celebrate it. And look, somebody somewhere may be feeling a little bit bad that one of their employees skipped them, but tough luck.
Again, I like channeling into a celebration.
Yeah, I think you've got to make it a collective celebration, and
I like that.
I'm not a big one for bureaucracy and hierarchy in the first place. So anything I can do to help break that down, and like that example, I think is a good thing. Somebody might get a little bit put out by it, but get over it. Yeah.
So building on that, what's the one trait you wish you could instill in every employee?
Honesty. Yeah. There's lots, but I'd go with honesty. And I say that.
Why is that number one for you?
Yeah, I say it for two reasons. One is that throughout my career, whenever we've not done very well as an organization, I think it's because we haven't been very honest. And I think back to my DHL US domestic days, we weren't very honest about where the product was and how well it was doing, etc., and the billing. And you were there. You remember all these painful things. And if we'd been more honest and dealt with them, we probably would have had a successful business. Maybe we'd have had a successful business. So I think generally a lack of honesty or trying to hide the truth in whatever way you want to call it doesn't end particularly well. And I think the other thing is that if I think about it the other way around, from me to them, to the employee, that statistically, trust is sort of seen as the number one factor that creates engagement, employee engagement. So if they trust you, you trust them. And honesty is probably the biggest breaker of trust, or lack of honesty is probably the biggest breaker of trust. So I think both ways, both positively and negatively, I think honesty on every level, good, bad, or indifferent, is probably the trait I would want everybody to have.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it's powerful because, just speaking from sort of a life perspective, learning to be honest with yourself as a leader, as an employee, is a strategic advantage versus choosing to see something that's really not the way it is, looking at what you can personally contribute and what you're, even in a problem, what's your what's been your contribution to that problem? Because that's what we can ultimately control.
And even, again, the Frank Appel, the CEO of Deutsche Post, he also gave me, I like listening to other really good leaders because they got some great advice. But we were chatting about this once a couple of years ago, and he said, a great example of that, Charles, is if you take the annual personal development appraisal process, which personally I absolutely hate. But anyway, to the point, we spend huge amounts of time trying to fix things that people say are development opportunities, rather than actually saying, you know what, if that development has been a development area for their 10 years, why is it suddenly going to change? Wouldn't we be better being honest with ourselves and saying, if you take my skill, if you think about whole leadership, head, heart, and guts. So if I'm very strong in heart and guts, which I am, by the way, but not necessarily always as strong from a head perspective, yes, you've got to have people. You can take tactics to mitigate that around you. Have the right people around you that offset that, but don't try and fix the thing you can't fix. Focus on how you can accelerate the things you're really great at. So I think, even with ourselves, as you said, be honest with yourself.
That's blasphemy for some organizations, right there.
Yeah, sure.
Focus on what people are really good at.
Yeah,
not the things they're not.
I give you again, coming back to your, how we knew each other. I'll give you a great example of that. When I was working in London. Many years ago, I had a great sales rep. He was one of the best closers of business I've ever had the experience to meet in 35 years. But his administration and timekeeping was the worst I've ever seen in my 35 years. The worst in 35 years. But we spent so much time trying to fix his organizational skills and his administrational skills, as opposed to saying, what we should do is just forget that, let him loose to go and win more business and focus on how we can amplify his strength rather than try and fix his weakness.
Whoa.
And I think we do that as an organization in many different areas, with people, with products, with whatever, many times, so sometimes you can't be everything, you got to sort of just amplify what you're great at.
Yeah. There's a lot of power in that. And for people just thinking about their personal careers too, it's easy to spend a lot of time, oh man, I need to do better at this. And sometimes you do need to level up to like an average level. Yeah. But there's a real power in, like you say, amplifying your strengths, going all in on that. And it makes me think, so if you guys had fired that guy, I mean,
trust me, that was one of the conversations.
I mean, what the cost would have been. I go into organizations and we help them quantify the cost of turnover. And that sometimes people are shocked that it can come up to $235,000 per employee per year. Absolutely. But you think about like that guy who's out closing deals, if you would have gotten rid of him because he couldn't do the administrative side of it, then it might have even be a higher cost of turnover, right? Absolutely. Because that's fresh revenue coming in.
And to your business now in transformation, you see it in businesses today who trying to, the most. I mean, as you know, most transformations fail, but the ones that succeed, I think they succeed more often than not because they go to the core of what they're really great at. And if again, and we use a real life example where both of you and I work, DHL, when we try to diversify too far and moved away from what we were actually the world's best at, we failed miserably to the point where it nearly shut down the business, to the point where it cost us 6,000 jobs in the US, which is something I never wish to repeat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why, now it's one of the most successful express operators is because they went back to focusing on what they're the best at. And I think there are a lot of parallels individually, collectively, team, product, businesses, where sometimes we try to solve everything and rather than just focus on what are we really, really good at.
Wow. Well, I could spend a lot of time on that, but one of the words that's coming up for me is all about burnout and thinking about, what's your, like, if you have an employee who's working like crazy, because and it came from you earlier when you were talking about how hard everybody's been working during COVID with all the accelerated, all the different size packages, a number of packages. When you see this in an employee, and I'm sure you have throughout the years, how do you approach them?
Honesty. So I think you've got to be. So again, to where we started, the energy project, and Tony Schwartz, who's the chief energy officer, who talks about this. There's some great leadership examples in that environment that people should look at, and he talks a lot about it's really important to understand that life, and generally speaking, life is not a marathon, it's short sprints. You should try and split it up into short sprints. And at the end of that sprint, then you take some time to recover and renew, because normally in life you just keep going and going and going and going. To your point, burnout comes through pretty quickly, and the problem is that if any employee or leader is in the burnout zone, they're not going to be performing. It's impossible. So if you want leaders or employees to operate in the high performance quadrant, then you've got to give them plenty of time and chance to renew. So to bring that back to reality, so from a personal perspective, and some people I think handle stress well and some don't. Personally, I don't get too stressed. I'm able to sort of keep the head fairly clear. But there are days, today actually, funny enough, is one of those days where I'm feeling a little bit more stressed than I do normally, because I just got a lot on my plate today. And a lot of...
I can't tell.
That's good. I get days where it's more difficult than others. And then you have got to build in some time to renew. Wow. So at some point today, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go and get some air. I'm going to walk around the block. I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do just to reposition my head and get myself in a clear space, because employees or people can't keep going. It's just not feasible. And then to the COVID situation, and bringing it back to real life there. So, 2 or 3 things that we do that, because it is one day after, it's a bit like Groundhog Day actually. So one day after another, and then we've got peak coming as well, which is, so we've expected our employees to do what they've done over the last 4 or 5 months, and now we're going to expect them to do it again, even more so in about 2 weeks' time. When we head into peak. So, and again, I get what I said earlier.
If everybody listening, peak is the busiest time of year, at least in years past before COVID, which is building up to Thanksgiving, Christmas,
Black Friday, Labor Day, all the sales, all the online sales. So our volumes.
That's when it's supposed to get really busy.
It's supposed to get really busy. This year we'll have peak within peak. So we're already operating at peak levels, and now we're going to have peak on top of that. So that's daunting to say the least. But anyway, to the point. So we took some tough decisions. So, customers are very demanding. They expect service to be at tip-top level, even through everything we've been through. But we've made some decisions which contradicted that, but for good reasons. So we were having employees work every weekend to get all the product out, just to try and stay close to our service standards. But we made some sensible decisions to make sure that we give people some time off, and we rotate that time off through the region, so people get some downtime, because it's just not sustainable otherwise. We celebrate, like I said earlier, through the Friday email and many other ways and methods too. We bought them all. We had lunches. We do as much as we can to sort of keep that energy as high as we can and as positive as we can. But we also have a lot of, the reality of life is that people deal with it differently. Like I said earlier, I'm not too bad, generally speaking, but some others struggle with it. So we have lots of helplines and support environments. So if people really are struggling for whatever reason, health, financial, and whatever other reason, they can. And
I love the idea of, to know burnout in someone else, you got to be able to identify it in yourself too and address it.
Exactly.
It starts with you.
And I think, people don't like, again, back to that honesty thing, they don't like to say, hey, I've got a problem. And I think some people do through COVID have had greater challenges than perhaps they would do otherwise. And so as well as sort of the being, the chief energy officer covers a third or 2/3 of the employees, we love that. But there's a third that, no matter how much I dance around, are still struggling with the situation and are feeling that pressure. So we create the mechanisms and the environment where they can have that conversation, very confidential conversation about what's troubling them. And we try and tackle that in the right way.
I want to be conscientious of your time, Charles, but I got a couple more questions. Can you go a little bit longer?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. When's a time you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it lead to your personal growth or success down the road?
I'll give you 2 real life examples. So my first ever leadership position I applied for was to be the supervisor of the radio room of the DHL London facility. So in other words, I was the person.
The radio room?
The radio room. So I was the person who would be in the room, or my team would be on the radio saying, you have a pickup going, because in those days we didn't have technology to be able to send it via digitally. So that was the very first leadership I applied for, and I didn't get it. Can you believe it? I couldn't believe it. I didn't get it. And being a very young and probably slightly naive individual, I talked to my then informal mentor who'd given me some of the examples and things we talked about earlier. And I said, that's it, I'm leaving DHL. And he said, really? I said, yeah, look, if they don't want me, then I'm going to go and find somebody that does. And so he took a moment to say, you should perhaps think about it. Let's talk about it. And he explored it. And so I took and I'm quite impulsive, but I took a bit of time to think about it and worked out there was probably a better way to tackle the problem than just throwing my toys out of the pram. But I guess, in that was a long time ago now, but in reality, depending on the size, I suppose sometimes the reaction is not too dissimilar. You have a choice. You have to stick your head in the sand, or you can try and do something about it. I choose for the most part to try and do something about it. So we have, a good challenge that we're dealing with now in Canada Post around some technology that's certainly causing me a few headaches. But there's, as I keep saying, there's only so much you can control and only so much you can actually do something about. And so just pause, breathe, reset, and go again.
That sounds a lot like meditation or mindfulness.
I believe in mindfulness. I think it's, again, not to suggest that everybody should, but it works for me. Certainly the focusing part in particular, I think really works for me. And I forget it very often, but when I do practice again and do it again, it makes a big difference. So again, people use different tools, but for me, it's about, just taking a bit of a breath, finding some quiet time, clearing the head. Cycling is a great way for me to do that. Clear the head, reset, staying focused on what's the end goal. What are you really trying to achieve? Not the trees in between or the wood in between or the whatever it is in between. What are the hurdles? What are you trying to get to? Where are you trying to get to? And if you stay very focused on what the end game is, it helps. It certainly helps me.
Focus on the end, the ideal outcome versus focusing on the hurdles or obstacles.
Yeah. There's lots of in any. I had a small break. I went and did a startup and in Dubai, which was I loved it. It was fantastic, and I've often said it was free training because it taught me so many things. To the point, it taught me so many things around dealing with failure every single day. It taught me the value of money. I know that may sound a little bit bizarre, but when you work for big corporations, when you're putting in multi-million-dollar investments, but in a startup, you're looking just to raise enough money to be able to pay 120 people at the end of the day their salary, is a different environment. So it was a fascinating experience. But again, it taught me the value of patience, taught me the value of staying focused on the end game, taught me the value of mindfulness, as you mentioned. So I'm okay.
Great stuff there. All right, just two more questions here, Charles, and then we'll get you out of the hot seat here. But what books, newsletters, or magazines or websites do you recommend to someone who's either in the C-suite now or is on a mission to get there?
There are countless books, and it's a bit like wine. Everybody will tell you what their favorite wine is. And
That's a good point.
And it's a little bit like books. You ask anyone else, read Tipping Point or read, I think it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I think you've got to find the subjects and content that's exciting for you. So I try and stick away from what books would I recommend. I would say, and the advice I give to others who've asked me similar questions is, and again, each their own. Some people are very comfortable reading a 400-page book. I personally like to read a 2-page summary on LinkedIn. So For me,
I like that.
Yeah, for me personally, I mean, just for me personally, I think it's really important. It is really, really important. If you're somebody listening to this podcast who's a manager of engineering or a director of products or whatever is a brain surgeon, whatever your chosen field is, you have got to stay relevant. And you'd be amazed again at the number of people I meet in my space, in e-commerce, in parcel and postal delivery, who are just not up to speed with the current thinkings around that activity. And this environment, I mean, particularly with e-commerce and particularly with COVID-19, is moving so fast. You can't possibly have a skill set that's anchored on 20 years ago. You need to have a skill set that's anchored on 20 minutes ago.
Wow.
So I think
so staying relevant, any mechanisms that you use?
Yeah, LinkedIn.
It sounds like LinkedIn's big for you.
LinkedIn, Twitter, websites. There's depending on your chosen field, there's plenty of specialist websites that post a lot of content. I take it from any source. Young employees around you, whoever it may be. So there's plenty of sort of areas you can go to pick up this content. But I think
that's aligned with what you said earlier, where you said focus on the end game. Your end game there is stay relevant in a world that can change in 20 minutes.
100%. So I think it's next week or the week after, I'm talking at a Brazilian conference around, last mile and cross-border. But what was true when I did the last presentation on cross-border about a year ago is definitely not true now. So you just got to keep refresh. Yeah.
Great. Well, what's a tool or gadget that's contributed to your success that the listeners can go out there and purchase?
A tool or gadget?
Personal or professional oriented.
You don't need to purchase anything, in my humble opinion.
Okay.
And again, it's different for different people, but as I talk to you today, Ben, I'm not so sure I'm fundamentally different to the person that joined DHL 35 years ago, that walked through the door for the interview. This is a true story, by the way. That walked through the door for that interview in shorts, flip-flops, a Frankie Goes to Hollywood relaxed t-shirt, a demi-wave haircut, and a big earring, a George Michael earring in my ear. Other than not having any of those items, the human inside of me, the person that sat there, and when they asked me why did I want to join the logistics industry, and the answers I gave, I'm not so sure are fundamentally different. So I think be very true to who you are, regardless of what position you get into.
Be true.
Be true to who you are. Be very authentic. I mean, they talk about this authentic leadership. That fundamentally is the same thing. Stay true to who you are, so that when you do meet somebody in a Union Square sales office, they think he's quite a decent person, or he seems like a decent person. He knows who I am. He knows where I come from. Don't try and pretend to be something you're not.
Oh, wow. I love that. And I think you pretty much put a cherry on top of a fun interview. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
Come and ask me in 14 years' time. How's it going? We should have a catch up.
Wow.
Cool.
Ben Fanning is a #1 best-selling author, Inc. magazine columnist, and CEO of the Fanning Group, an international consultancy and corporate training company. To learn how they can help your organization, go to benfanning.com.